and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Bangkok, Thailand, to discuss North Korea among other key global issues. And the U.S. warns against North Korean weapons transfers to Russia. Today, we discuss how best to deter North Korea's illicit activities and provocations.
북한 정권은 오로지 세습 전체주의 정권 유지를 위해 물불을 가리지 않고 있습니다.
Is to use their relationship with DPRK to engage in diplomacy and try to bring an end to those actions.
In the studio with me, Dr. David Asher, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. Dr. Asher has been a senior advisor to 5 secretaries of state. Under President Bush and Secretaries Powell and Rice, he played a leading role on North Korea, serving as the director of the North Korea Activities Group at the National Security Council and U.S. delegation advisor in the six-party talks. Dr. Asher spearheaded the designation and law enforcement penetration of Banco Delta Asia. Also joining us, Mr. Anthony Ruggiero, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mr. Ruggiero was the National Security Council Senior Director for Counterproliferation and Biodefense during the Trump administration. He was also NSC Director for North Korea. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Dr. Asher, the U.S. government on a weekly basis, if not daily basis, warns against Russia's use of North Korea's weapons against Ukraine. Now, compared to the frequency and severity of the warning, is the U.S. government doing enough to stop the trade between North Korea and Russia?
I don't know that we're doing anything, frankly, significant that is public. And to do a type of interdiction strategy or blocking strategy, mostly the evidence would be public. So at least to my knowledge and from my perspective and experience, I see us as having essentially no effective effort to target those transfers. And those transfers are becoming quite instrumental as Russia prepares for a summer offensive or late spring offensive to actually take some serious territory from the Ukraine back before they might engage in some sort of negotiation.
So you're talking about interdictions and blocking, so physically going after those trade, not just sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because they can just cross the border into Russia, so from North Korea. So, I mean, the sanctions actually are your most effective attempt, but then there's things that, some people would say would be covert operations. I'm not going to say it has to be like that. You can do things under the table to try to complicate their ability to ship weapons. There are things you can do. You can go back and read what the Reagan administration did against the Soviet Union for evidence of what a covert action program to stop weapons transfers looked like. You can do things like sabotage as well. I mean, this is all well established in history. It doesn't seem like anything's breaking inside North Korea or anything that the Russians are receiving is having a trouble functioning. I think that the next level of transfers is about to occur. I think there are going to be much more significant weapons transfers here.
Similar to what Ukrainian intelligence are doing, they're going after the railways.
Yeah, they're doing the right thing, and supporting them would be our primary sort of way of achieving a result. But I just haven't heard about anything, spectacular explosions of train cars full of weapons coming from Russia, for example, or planes, not making it to their intended destination. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can read about even in spy novels, and it's not all wrong.
Mr. Ruggiero, when it comes to the sanctions front, the Biden administration has been designating a few individuals and companies related to the transfer between North Korea and Russia, including a Slovakian arms dealer. How effective is this?
Yeah, we have to remember that about a year ago is when the White House first said that Russia and North Korea were working together on shipping artillery and other munitions, and the administration basically did nothing about it. They, went to the Security Council, which is a waste of time. They issued some strongly worded statements, and nothing happened. They tried to shame Putin and Kim into stopping this, and then the two of them upped the ante and transferred ballistic missiles. I mean, we can go through all the sanctions they put out. The most recent sanctions from this administration say that the Russians and the North Koreans used airlines that were sanctioned months before the transfers in November 2023 for ballistic missiles. So to me, that means that they're not actually targeting the things that are most effective, which is Kim's revenue stream. And it still baffles me that they refused to do that and put Kim's strategic priorities at risk. I really don't understand why they haven't done that a year later now.
But the Biden administration is making constant efforts and is designating at least a few individuals related to the trade between North Korea and Russia every few months.
But they're not. I mean, let's be clear. They say that they're going after networks. When you look at the networks of these representatives in China and Iran and elsewhere, they trumpeted this very big effort, but it's only North Koreans. It defies common sense to believe that those North Koreans inside of China are not working with Chinese banks, Chinese companies, and Chinese individuals. So what they're doing is they're looking at a network and they're only going after the North Koreans associated with that network. None of the support, none of the third-party individuals that would actually deter North Korea from these activities. So they're just checking the box. They're just being able to say, we're doing something on North Korea so they can move to what they believe are other foreign policy priorities. And the problem is that by the fact that they've ignored this, they've allowed North Korea to insert itself into the Russia-Ukraine war. That is of their own doing.
But this is not a new phenomenon. The sanctions against North Korea has weakened even during the Trump administration, has continued into the Biden administration.
That's right. Yeah. No, I don't understand it. I don't know what, obviously I've spent a lot of time inside and outside of government, and my arguments have been the same. We know how to target North Korea's strategic priorities. We have just chosen not to do it. And that is a bipartisan, that is why we have a bipartisan failure of the last, 30 plus years. It's not because we're not talking to them enough. We're certainly talking to them a lot, but we basically give up the leverage that we have, and we won't build it up for the future.
Dr. Asher, the Biden administration is proactively releasing information regarding the trade between North Korea and Russia. And when it comes to Hamas, the White House says that it is aware that North Korean weapons were used by Hamas, but it is not aware of any military cooperation between the two. While you were in the government or ever since, have you seen some kind of indications that North Korea is directly involved in weapons transfers to Hamas, to the Houthis, and to Hezbollah?
Yeah, I have. Yes, definitely. And I've been in and out of the government in advisory capacity a lot more times than in my bio sort of indicates. I certainly was involved during the Trump administration too, not at the central role that Anthony had, but I was focusing on major adversaries, weapons of mass destruction programs, and how to target them. And it wasn't through negotiations, I can assure you. And the conventional arms transfers, yeah, we've seen them going through Iranian cutouts, and also just they've sold directly to Hamas historically. I don't think it's a decisive assistance in terms of weapons to them. When it gets to Hezbollah and it gets into the IRGC and the IRGC Quds Force, you're dealing with much more substantive cooperation, some of which, frankly, we still don't know the full extent of. We know that there is a lot of cooperation. There's a number of trading companies that have been sanctioned for years that are still operating in Iran. I can see it based on publicly available corporate data. And those North Korean trading companies seem to be doing quite well. They've opened more offices, so they haven't closed offices. That's sometimes an indicator. And you can see in the global shipping data, it's public. It's actually amazing what's public these days. It used to be classified. You can see there's quite a few shipments going on through conduits that could easily make their way to Hamas. I'm more worried about Hezbollah personally at the moment in terms of higher end weaponry. And then of course, North Korea and Iran have been working together for many years on missiles. And I think that we will start to see the Iranian missile threat elevate here substantively. And don't forget that Hezbollah may have access to larger missiles than people are publicly aware of. And that would be almost impossible for the Israelis to stop on such, given the close proximity.
Dr. Asher, what you have just explained to us, does that point to direct military cooperation between North Korea and these groups? Because the White House, quote unquote, said has seen no indication of military cooperation between them.
Well, I mean, I spent, including working with Anthony many times, I mean, I've chased these people around myself, actually, over the years. They know that. So I've seen the cooperation going through Swiss trading companies.
Then why would the U.S. government put it this way, that there is no indication between North Korea and
Well, they say
Hamas?
there's no indication of a lot of things. So these indications related to North Korea, there are plenty of them. Look, you don't need a security clearance to look at it. I founded a company called Sayari that collects commercial data, and a huge relationship with the U.S. government. It's public that we have it. And we can see in the corporate records that the Ma Xiaohong network, which is a critical support network to the Kim regime, has actually expanded considerably in northern China in the last 4 years. Okay, just the number of companies they have, the relationships that they've got to designated North Korean actors and to Chinese military companies. I mean, you don't, again, this stuff is sort of publicly available. So I don't know what indication means here. It's, if we're talking about is there hard intelligence? Of course there is. You just have to use what's between your two ears.
Mr. Ruggiero, so do you think there is a connection between North Korea and these non-state groups?
As David suggested, Iran and North Korea have a very strong relationship. North Korea is in it for the money. They're not in it for the ideology. And there's some evidence that they might even supply both sides if they want. Obviously, they're not going to supply Israel in this case, but they're in it for the money. And if the Iranians have the money or other commodities that they're interested in, then the North Koreans probably are not as worried about where they probably have some red lines in terms of the types of material that go, but it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing that on the battlefield.
Ruggiero, do you think it's because U.S. government, the trade between North Korea and Russia is much more important, that it is watering down North Korea's any other illicit activities with other groups?
Well, I suspect that this cooperation happened some time ago, that it hasn't. I would be surprised if it happened post October 7, so it's probably happened over a number of years. And again, that gets back to, when Kim feels comfortable, he can do all of these extracurricular activities. He can work with Russia. He can work with, terrorist groups through Iran. He can work with other countries. He can build a nuclear reactor in Syria. We have this evidence that the Kim family, when they feel comfortable and they don't feel like their revenue is at risk, they do all these extracurricular activities. So it's really on us to reverse that.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Ruggiero, after the meeting between National Security Advisor Sullivan and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the U.S. government asked China to play a constructive role to exert its efforts to use its influence to bring North Korea back to the path of denuclearization. Now, in the age of great power competition, wouldn't China want to use North Korea as an irritant against the United States? Would China have any motivation to apply pressure on North Korea?
Yeah, I don't see it. I don't understand why that's our approach. The thing I understand in this town, in D.C. in particular, where there's a certain segment that's enamored with let's negotiate a limited nuclear deal or an ICBM deal of some sort. My response to that is, and it sounds like this administration might be going down that pathway, my response is what leverage are you going to use? Because there is no sanctions leverage. The Chinese know that, the Russians know it, and more importantly, Kim knows that. So what is Kim going to ask for in those negotiations? Are we really going to have a conversation about our troop presence in South Korea and Japan? How does that help us in the future fight against China? So I'm not sure that people have really thought through strategically what a limited deal would require, because sanctions relief, if I were in Kim's shoes or advising him, there's nothing there. He's already comfortable. There are no real sanctions being implemented. So just removing symbolic sanctions is not going to do it for North Korea. They're going to ask for more. And I'm not sure we're prepared for that. And I'm surprised that this administration hasn't used the justification of the Russia war to just pound North Korea's revenue stream to develop the leverage that they would need for any kind of deal they want to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Asher, U.S. government has many times asked China to play a constructive role against North Korea, and China has not responded. Is this a strategic miscalculation to ask again, or is just there's no better options out there? As Mr. Ruggiero pointed out, is there any levers that the United States can use?
Well, all I can say is that during the first 2 years of the Trump administration, when Anthony was in charge of North Korea, among other things at the NSC, the U.S. government undertook a full-fledged pressure effort to have a disruptive influence inside North Korea. The North Koreans are fully aware that something was happening, and all I can say is, echoing what Secretary Pompeo said when he was Director of Central Intelligence at the Aspen Institute, is that there's a sledgehammer and the scalpel, and where he was parked was sort of the sledgehammer. And there's a lot of things that the U.S. government has in its power to do that what can happen without the cooperation of anyone. When I worked on Iran under General Mattis, General Petraeus, and General Allen at the Central Command, we, did a lot of things to complicate their weapons programs and things that, I can't comment on, despite all the news. But it definitely caused irritation, complication, and delay. These things are perfectly capable. Look, North Korea has a very narrow cyber accesses into the world. We had a kid, I believe, in California a few years ago who actually hacked into North Korea and shut down most of their internet access. If that can happen, don't tell me the U.S. government agencies can't do it 10 times over. So, and by the way, so can the NIS and other parts of the South Korean government. And what we should be doing is looking, especially at the cyber side, because that is the biggest source of illicit income to this regime now. They are stealing their way into prosperity inside the palace of the Kim family. And we should destroy that income stream. And trust me, we could do it.
So Dr. Asher, Dr. Siegfried Hecker said in his book that the Chinese were not responsible for the North Korean nuclear programs and cannot be looked to for a resolution of the problem. Do you think otherwise, or has China helped North Korea advance its nuclear programs?
Of course. There's a company called LIMAC, just a company affiliated with Baoyan State Nuclear Company, which makes nuclear reactors for the Chinese Navy, among other things. They have an office in Pyongyang, okay? They're supposedly engaged in non-ferrous metal trades, probably specialty steel, like Mareigine steel for centrifuges. This is just all public. This is the thing. The open source intelligence revolution is here. We just have to look very hard at the corporate data, and you see it. LIMAC even has an office in Houston, Texas, which I tried to shut down several times, and somehow it keeps popping back up. And that office in Houston, we believe, has shipped nearly $20 million in parts that are related to nuclear instruments and nuclear control systems even into Dandong, China. Okay, based on corporate data you can get through Panjiva and other corporate data sources. We're not even doing a job to shut this down in our own country, is what I'm trying to say. The idea that the North Koreans are here, maybe not in a big way, but they are, and they certainly are operating with long supply chains around the world, all of which could be contained, countered, and potentially collapsed.
Right. Mr. Ruggiero, Dr. Asher just said, of course, China helped North Korea build its nuclear program. If that's the case, then isn't there a fundamental contradiction for the United States to ask China to play a constructive role in denuclearizing North Korea?
Yeah, I don't think China and Russia are partners here, right? Those countries are stopping any action in the Security Council, and those are the countries that are violating the UN sanctions that they voted for, and U.S. sanctions, most importantly, for those here in the United States. Certainly people can read my review of Sig Hecker's book in foreign policy if they want to do that. I think it came out about a year ago. But basically the bottom line of his book is recommending the same foreign policy that has failed, really since 1994, as if it's a new policy, not to spoil it, but it's not innovative, and the Chinese and the Russians created this problem, but they're not going to help us solve it. So the U.S. is going to have to, as it has done, solve it on its own.
And Mr. Ruggiero, North Korea continues to import luxury goods, with Kim Jong-un seen in Mercedes Maybach sedan, and Mercedes-Benz told VOA it does not allow doing business in states such as North Korea and prohibits the sale of its products to unauthorized resellers outside of contract territory. Is China in the middle of this loophole? What can one do to stop the flow of luxury goods into North Korea?
Well, it is quite amazing, right? Kim talks about, the North Korean people have to, be prepared for hard times. Those hard times do not extend to the elites in the military and to Kim himself, right? Those are very expensive cars that you just noted. It could be through China, it could be through other countries. As David noted, the use of front companies and others. But if we don't have this culture of compliance and implementation of sanctions, then these kinds of things are going to get through. And I think Chinese banks are probably not looking for it, and so that's a big part of the problem. But of course, this emphasizes that Kim doesn't care about the North Korean people. He could use that money to have a flourishing economy if he wanted. But he doesn't. He is comfortable where he is, and part of the challenge for the United States is making him uncomfortable. And we know how to do that. We've just chosen not to.
Well, you target the Ma Xiaohong network would be one of your primaries, because she's basically, if you study her case carefully, and there's quite a lot of information that came out through unsealed indictments against her, as well as the sanctions against her network. She was essentially an affiliate of Chang Song Tech, Kim's uncle. And that network is a leadership finance network, and one of their primary goals is importing luxury or exporting luxury goods from China into North Korea. And they, as I've already mentioned, they're operating basically unabated. And they are sanctioned. So one of the biggest problems, and Anthony and I have talked about this in many government forums as well as think tanks, verification and compliance of sanctions is almost non-existent. We sanction people, and then we walk away as if that's going to change anything.
So I want both your take on this. Just briefly, President Trump is closing in on GOP presidential nomination. Now, if President Trump is reelected, Mr. Ruggiero, will he try to make a deal with North Korea, stop the drill between U.S. and South Korea, and then go for nuclear freeze of North Korea?
Well, I think it depends on who's in office in about a year, right? Whether it's a second term for either President Biden or former President Trump. The problem for both of them is they have no leverage. They have no leverage at all against North Korea, or if they chose to go the China and Russia route to try and pressure Kim, there's no leverage there either. So either president would have to do the same thing that President Trump did starting in 2017, which is build back up the pressure to provide the leverage for the kind of negotiated settlement that we would need. So it's going to take some time. No president is going to be able to come in on January 20, 2025 and just start negotiating with North Korea.
Dr. Asher?
I agree. I think it's, I'm just, of the belief that we just have a hard containment challenge in North Korea. I don't favor serious negotiations anymore. I've been through too many serious negotiations with the North Koreans, and as a outsider looking in at what happened with President Trump's attempt at the highest level attempt in history, and I think he was serious as the president. He really did hope that he could strike a deal. He's the art of the deal guy, but even he concluded in Hanoi that there was no deal. It was going to be possible because the North Koreans just cheat. When their lips are moving, they're lying. So we, the president rightfully, despite his sentimental attachment to, he calls Chairman Kim, I just call him Kim the despot. He saw that this was just not working, and it's certainly not going to work with North Korea having now doubled its nuclear stockpile, probably in the interim since the last Trump administration. I mean, and I am really concerned about them selling weapons. I think that we've seen them sell programs, capabilities, technology. There's no reason they're not going to sell weapons at this stage. Nobody seems willing to counter it. And what would we do if they did it? Negotiate.
Well, as we close, I do want to note that there are those in Washington who do believe in serious negotiation with North Korea, including those in the Biden administration.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Asher, Mr. Ruggiero. Until we meet next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.